In this video, we're going to continue to use Maven, and we're going to use Maven to pull in a database server, or actually just a database system called HyperSQL or HSQLDB. And we're also going to use the JDBC API as part of Java to interact with this database. So let's go ahead and start off by talking about what I'm importing. In my POM file here, I've got the HSQLDB and I've got Commons.io. That's Apache Commons.io. This is actually just for file system access, and it's just for some convenient stuff I'm gonna do. I'll show you guys later what I'm doing here. But the main thing is this dependency right here. This is the HSQLDB database, and we're going to use this to actually have an embedded Java database inside of our Java program. So the HyperSQL database, it's at hsqldb.org. It's a 100% Java database. So if you've used MS SQL, the Microsoft SQL Server, or MySQL, those are like more fully developed database servers that are meant to handle large amounts of traffic and more serious workloads. This HyperSQL database, it's just a simple database that's actually in the Java process itself, and you can make it write directly to a file. You can make it write directly to an in-memory table. So the idea of this is to be embedded into a Java system that maybe runs on some kind of small device or something like that, like a phone or like a part of a car, something like that. It's not actually meant to be backing a web server or something like MySQL would be. But the idea is it's very fast, it's very lightweight, and it should be easy to use. I'm going to show you, we're going to use a file system version of this, and it writes everything to the file so that when you restart the program, you can actually see on the file everything it's going to insert in the database. So it'll be really good for us to use to start out with. They have a downloads page where you can get the jar file, but I'm going to say don't do that. Go ahead and go to Maven Central and pick up the dependency from Maven. And I've already done that here in my project. I've got my Maven project already created. So I already have my dependencies downloaded here. So HyperSQL, they have a pretty good guide, and essentially what I've done so far, I've created a connection in my code. So we'll show you that. And if you want to check out the user guide here, I'll definitely post a link up to it. It's very detailed. And they have a FAQ too if you're interested in reading through this. Some of this information is useful as well. So first, we're going to use something called JDBC to connect to this database. And JDBC, it actually stands for Java Database Connectivity API. So what it is, it's a Java interface that's part of the Java platform, and it lets you connect to all kinds of different database servers with like a common set of interfaces, or and it's actually what they would call an API, an application programming interface. So that just means it's kind of like the gateway in between one system to another system is what an API is. And system can be almost anything, so API can also almost be anything. People throw that word around a lot. So if you see though, this java.sql stuff here, this is all part of JDBC, Java SQL Connection, Java SQL Driver Manager. So what's cool is if you learn how to use this JDBC API with HyperSQL, it'll work the same way with MySQL. So they all use this JDBC API. So it really pays to learn this, and it doesn't actually matter which database you use, because all of these relational databases are fairly similar in their SQL. So like this SQL, it's going to look fairly similar to MySQL, right, or MS SQL. and the way you interact with it is going to be the same, but underneath it's doing different things, right? Like you can have different types of data, you can have different ways of storing it, and you can be hitting a server, or you can be hitting a file system, or you could just be hitting the actual memory. So this has a memory option, it's called mem. You could change it to mem, and then the database would disappear when you close the program. But we're going to use the file version, and I have a connection string here. This is a JDBC connection string, and I'm saying I want to use JDBC protocol, and I want to use HyperSQLDB. I want to use file, and this is where my file database is going to be. And I already started up this database server before, so I have my file database created. And what's really cool is this database.script file right here. This is the complete representation of the database as a file. And what happens is when we start our program back up, it's going to run this script, and all of these values are going to get loaded right back into memory and become part of this database again. And then alternatively, every time we modify the database, it's going to update this database.script file right there. So that's a little bit about what we're doing. That's a little bit about JDBC. You can read about JDBC, but you're going to see what we're going to do. We're going to open a connection, and we're going to create statements, we're going to execute statements, and we're going to read result sets. And it's going to work the same whatever relational database system you're using underneath JDBC. So starting out, I've got a SQL script, and this is a kind of design pattern that maybe not a design pattern, but just a technique. I have my SQL script stored on a file here inside of this .SQL directory, or this SQL directory and their .SQL scripts. So I have my create table if not exists create table named contacts. It's got a name, an email, and a phone. Pretty simple. And I've got a Java representation, same idea here. Name, email, phone, just strings, right? Just strings. So that's what this create table does. And again, we've got it represented here in this Java class called contact. And now the next script I'm going to show you is called populate contacts, where we're actually going to insert values into it. I've got a president, a Roman emperor, and an author, and another author. And I've got kind of bogus data here. But the names are those are not bogus data, so that'll work. And you'll notice I don't have a primary key or anything. We're not going to mess with that. I'm just inserting some strings just to make this example very simple. We're not going to worry about primary keys or anything like that. So the problem now, if we're not caring about primary keys, if I run this insert again, we're going to get duplicates. So you'll see that. So I'm going to delete everything inside of here, and we're going to start fresh. I'm just going to delete all of this data because this database completely exists on our file system. If I clear that file system, let's refresh. Database is gone, right? So we're going to run db example, and it's going to create everything again. So let's read through the code and see what I've got going on here. First thing I'm doing, I'm reading these into strings. So this is doing exactly what it says it's doing. If we look at this read to string, all it does is open the file for the name. So it'll open that file, and then it'll read the file into a string. And this is that Apache Commons IO file utils. This is just a utility function, and again, it's included as part of this. So there's a method called read file to string. It's just super convenient thing to use, so I'm using that right here. So we've got create contacts, that's our first SQL script, and we've got populate contacts, that's our second SQL script. So this is going to do a create table, and this is going to do a insert or update. I believe it's insert, yeah. And then after that, we're going to do a read. So first, what we're going to do is load the database driver. There's a Stack Overflow question. If you want to read through this, it's pretty interesting. It kind of explains that there are static initializers on these classes, and that's why you need to load this. But this is what we have to do. We have to load this class first. And we know we'll find it. It's just that this driver has to be initialized. So, but we know we'll find it because I have it included here on the POM file, this HSQLDB, and it corresponds to this jar right here. Okay, so let's keep going. So after we load the driver, we're going to make a connection, and this is the JDBC connection, driver manager.connection. This is Java SQL Driver Manager. This is part of JDBC. They all function pretty similarly, these connection strings. It says JDBC, then the type of the database, and then you put extra parameters after that. So what the argument order is, it's connection string, then username, and then password. With HyperSQL, it turns out that the default username is SA and the default password is no password. So we're just going to do that, and it doesn't really make sense to put a password on it because it's just on our disk and it'll only be local to wherever the program is running. And of course this as you saw, the data was in plain text, so it doesn't make a whole lot of sense to do anything with the password, even though it is hashed in there. It is hashed. Okay, so let's keep going. We create a connection. This is the connection here. And I'm storing this object at the class level. This is the connection to the database. And I'm in a try block now. So let's just keep in mind this whole time we're going to be in a try block. Second thing I'm going to do is create statement and execute update, create contacts. This is on the connection object. I have this create statement method, and it lets me run statements. And I'm saying I'm going to execute an update. This is called a mutate, right? So we're going to change the state of the database here. This is a mutate operation. And this is going to run this create contacts. Again, that contacts was create table if not exists. So that's the schema for the table. We're creating it. Second thing is we're adding contacts, create statement, execute, update. Let's format that like the other one. Populate contacts, so we're populating them now. It's just going to run these statements, and then after that we're going to do something different. We're going to start reading the data back out, and this was a pretty short query, so I just put the query directly into Java here in this Java code. The reason I kind of abstracted these out here into files was, one, for organization, but two, Java, I think, as you know, you can't have multi-line strings. So if you try to embed Java in SQL or SQL in Java, it ends up looking really ugly. So you can't have multi-line strings in Java. So we're doing this. All right. So next thing we're going to do, we're going to create something called a prepared statement. This prepared statement, it lets us put parameters into it. The thing is, though, this has no parameters. So the prepared statement might be out of the scope of this video, but just a quick explanation. It's a way of subbing in data, or you put question marks, and those question marks get filled in with variables, basically. And it's a way of subbing in data into SQL statements that is more secure than just concatenating strings together. So we've got this prepared statement here. We're saying there are no parameters. It's just a select statement with no parameters, and we're going to execute the query. What we get back is a result set, and this is what is called a database result set. This is just an interface, and we read through the result set. So in the result set you have rows, and then each row will have columns. It's just like an Excel spreadsheet. So you're reading basically a sheet back, and when you call rs.next, you get a new row. So, and then when you call things like getString, you get the column. We'll have to run this so you can kind of see what's going on here, but a quick overview. I'm creating contacts. These contacts, I'm setting data into them, and it's just column 1, column 2, column 3. We happen to know that column 1 is name, column 2 is email, column 3 is phone. but we're going to throw those columns into this contact, and contact has a constructor called name, email, phone. So those should correspond to each other. And all I'm doing is when I read this result set back out, I'm assigning them into this POJO, this plain old Java object, as a representation so I can manipulate my contact. So it just, while rs.next, it's going to read the next row, and then when you call ResultSet, you're going to get column values from your columns, or from your row, sorry. And here we're just printing out the context. So, and then finally, we're going to close the database. And now the trick is you have to remember to close this database, because if you don't, you'll have a lock file on the database, and the database will remain open. What a lock file is, you actually may not realize this, but even on a Windows machine, when you open an Excel document in Windows Excel or a Word document, it creates a lock file so that two people cannot open the same document at the same time. Now, you may not notice that locally, since you're the only one ever working in it at a time probably, but if you had a Word document on a network file and two people tried to open that Word document at the same time, whoever got in there first would own the lock file, and Word would see there's a lock file that corresponds to that document, and it would say it's locked. So this works exactly the same way with the database. Because the database is a file system based database, it's going to write a lock file here, and it's going to say, well, there's something using this still because it's locked. Connection closes this. So we just need to make sure we close the connection when we're done. And this means even if there's an error and we blow up our SQL statement, the connection should close because it's in this finally block. So yeah, let's go ahead and run this. Here we go. So attempting to create context in the database. We're printing out that line, and then we're going to go ahead and run all this stuff. It must have run these successfully because we finally got all the way down here and printed this out. So you can see we created the context database table. Then we finally inserted the data, and we read the data, and then lastly we printed out the data we read. So you can see the contact, I called toString on these. That's what this print line is doing, the contact. We got a name, we got an email, we got a phone, name, email, phone, name, email, phone. Yeah, so everything looks correct. We got all these records. So here's the cool thing. In my connection string, I just said DB data my database. Now, if I refresh this, you're going to see, because I didn't specify anything before this, I didn't say this is like an absolute path, it's going to be created in the same folder as this HyperSQL folder project I'm in. And if I refresh this, you'll see my database files got created right here. There they are. So my database.log, my database.properties, my database script. So the log is actually recording everything we did. We created a table, we inserted contacts, and we finally, it doesn't show the select statement, it just shows the mutations. Properties, it's saying the version of the database engine is 2.3. I think the newest one, yeah, we're a little bit behind. 2.3.4 is released. We're on 2.3.1. But the cool thing about Maven, you can just change this number right here and you'll get the newer version. So yeah, let's keep checking this out. We've got the database log file, the properties file, and then here's the cool thing is the script file. This is the complete representation of the database as a file. So this really helps us as kind of beginners at this. We can look and see everything that's going on inside here, and it helps us debug, right? So pretty cool. So this is everything that everything about this database, and here's the log file. This shows everything we did to the database. So now that we've done that, we inserted some data into the database. What we want to do now is let's just double check to make sure that worked. So let's run as a Java application. you'll see, okay, again, there's that primary key thing I told you about. I read out, first I got my old data, and then I inserted more data into it. And then when I read it, now my list is twice as big. So you'll see that data did persist. And the reason why these are duplicated is because there's no primary key on here to say that, you know, there's some uniqueness, and there's no uniqueness forced on name or anything. So I'm just inserting duplicate data in here, and the database is letting me. But I guess the idea here was to just show you that the data was persisted between the running of this application. There's one more cool thing I want to show you about HyperSQL. It comes with a database manager. It's if you just start typing database manager swing, if you have it imported in your POM file, you'll get this this class here with a main method on it. It's meant to be run directly from the jar file, but you can run it from another Java file, and it needs a couple arguments. It needs the URL with your connection string, and it finally needs a no exit argument. These are the actual arguments you're passing into a command line program, and we're just running this command line program directly from Java. So let's go ahead and run this. All right. Seems like, so I've had some problems with this, and I'm not 100% sure if it's just a Linux issue or what, but sometimes it's not. Yeah, like every other time it doesn't run for me. I don't know if that's just a Linux issue or what the issue is. Could be a lot of things. But basically, you see you've got a table here, public.context. I can say I want to select, and this is a super simple database editor. It's not meant to be really used a lot. It's just meant for like quick debugging. So I can execute SQL, and you'll see I've got my records in here. And I can definitely do an update statement too. I can say set email equals test at example.com, where email equals not at real.com. So I'm going to set this email to where they used to be called not at real.com, and that's going to change a bunch of them. It should update 6 records in here. So I hit execute SQL. Yeah, it updated 6 records. Now I can do my select statement again, and you'll see I got all these updates here. So that's this is just a little database manager app. If you need to do some debugging, it's kind of convenient. So I'm going to exit this now. I'll post this code up with the video as well as all of the other code, in case you just want to copy and paste this and run it. And you can see it's still running, so I've something's wrong with this code, but that's how you get it started. All right, so let's take a look at the database file on the there we go. So here's our database script. Create the table, grant permission, grant DBA to SA, and then we're inserting all this data. And you can see here's a log. It's pretty cool. We've got all this data saved, and if we run this, let's run this one more time. Let's run this example thing. So we're going to insert more data. And check it out. You can see when we updated that stuff, that update persisted. So that's pretty cool. We got to see our update persist from the database manager system. And then here's our new data we just inserted. So it's HyperSQL. It's great for the purposes of just learning. It's a very simple database. It's an embedded database. You can run it right off the file system. And if you want to start over, just go ahead and blow away all this stuff. You can start fresh. There we go. Started fresh. So that's it. This was just a demo of the HyperSQL database. It's HSQLDB.org. We're using JDBC in this example to connect to it, and I got it through Maven, and here is the POM. I'll paste this up in the video too. Thanks for watching.